Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. And do I have a treat for you today? We have a special guest on the show, Anthony Metivier, who's a good friend of mine and a memory expert extraordinaire, who's going to be talking to us about memory palaces. Now, before you all zone out, memory palaces are a very, very effective technique that can help you remember a lot of things quickly and commit them to your long-term memory. And so we're going to be talking in this episode about how you can use these memory techniques to learn a foreign alphabet. And specifically, we're going to be talking about hiragana, which is one of the native Japanese alphabets, one of the three alphabets that are used in Japan. And if you are someone that's learning Japanese and hasn't managed to learn hiragana or katakana yet, you're going to want to listen to this. Now, without any further ado, I give you my conversation with Anthony Metivier. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's just fantastic to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy that we're finally getting a chance to do this, because I've been wanting to invite you on the podcast for ages, and it's great that it's finally happened. So, for those people out there who are not familiar with you, can you give us a quick summary, quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Well, as you said, my name is Anthony Metivier, and I run a website called magneticmemorymethod.com, and it is devoted to helping people learn and memorize and recall information with great ease, regardless of what that information might be. But it has a particular focus on language learning in particular, because that is one of the greatest challenges, and it's one of the greatest challenges that I faced a few times. And I just thought these techniques that are being taught in schools and index cards and software and so forth, this just isn't working for me. It was just too boring, and I have a different kind of mind, but I didn't have a solution. So I figured stuff out based on something that had really helped me out during a period of depression in grad school, which was memory techniques, or mnemonics as they're often called, and a particular kind, which is the memory palace. And I was able to really do some things that without these techniques, I'm sure I'd probably be living on the street, or at least I'd be performing magic on the street, because I'm just one of the, it's just an incredible skill. And so I've made it my goal to share it with as many people as possible. And with the magic of the internet, that is proving to be quite a lot, and people are getting great results from picking up these techniques, especially with their language learning.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I can certainly speak to the power of these things, because, as language learners, we all have problems with our memory. We all wish we could memorize more stuff, right? The more words you learn, the better you are at speaking the language. It's as simple as that. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember when you first taught me some of these memory techniques back when I was learning Arabic. I was able to memorize a large number of Arabic verbs, like in a short space of time, and still remember them perfectly months later. So it was a real, it was really, really powerful for me, and I've definitely learned a lot from your teachings. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about these memory techniques, but specifically as relates to foreign alphabets, right? Because we were talking about this before, and both of us have in the past learned Japanese, and the reason that I thought this was particularly interesting was because I often get people asking me things like, do I have to learn? I'm learning Japanese. Do I have to learn to read and write? Or I'm learning Arabic. Do I have to learn the alphabet? And the answer is yes, because it's really you don't have thousands and thousands of characters to learn. It's a manageable amount. But at the same time, it's not necessarily easy. And if you're learning a Japanese alphabet for the first time, it can be tough. So we are going to talk about how we can use memory techniques specifically to learn an alphabet. So could you talk a little bit about these techniques, Anthony, and how they could apply to an alphabet, not just learning and memorizing words?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think the first thing to be said is that languages are not primarily auditory, they're also visual. There's a massive visual component to it. And so how they're written is just a part of learning a language, and it's part of how you can learn how to speak properly, because when you can read and figure out how to sound things out, then that's part of your learning process. And it's just a communication strategy that's used in many, many, many languages. Now, when it comes to something like a character set, like the hiragana, it's it's something that can be shocking when you first look at it, because it's just this wash of squiggles, and they're laid out on a grid, and it can be really hard to count how many there are. And you kind of feel the sense of overwhelm, and I certainly did. Even though I have had experience with learning, the Russian character set and the Greek character set and so forth, when I looked at hiragana, I just almost thought this is the outer limits of what's possible with memory techniques. But I persisted, and I thought, I'm going to do this. There has to be a way. And it turned out that it's even easier than those other character sets that one coming from an English alphabet upbringing, so to speak, has a better grip on intuitively. And part of that has to do with how weird and strange it looks and what you can do using the techniques. So
why is it that people find it so hard to memorize, say, hiragana? Why would your average person find it difficult to memorize those characters?
I think part of it is depth of experience, looking at the letter A if you're an English speaker and knowing it's A, and so you have to start all over again and look at something and try to assign something to it, and it's completely the relationship between the way it looks and the way it's supposed to sound is arbitrary, right? And that's also true of every letter in the alphabet. It's just that it's no longer arbitrary to us through years and years and years of use. We've come to personalize them. And that's exactly what we can do very, very fast, is look at a character and personalize it. But the first thing that happens is that people push it away. They get afraid. They start to think it's hard.
Yeah.
And by doing that, they depersonalize it. But you need to invite it in. If you think of your mind as this soft and warm and embracing place, like imagine, you're baking cookies for a guest, and you want your guest to come in and say, look, come, sit down. I've got cookies for you. Stay a while. And you go into the kitchen, you bring them cookies. Well, you can do that with information. And the kitchen and the living room where you want your guest to come to is not a bad way of thinking about this, because I like the memory palace technique of all the memory techniques. And it's very much like creating a space for information to come and stay a while,
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned memory palaces then. Now, so some people out there might be thinking, what on earth is a memory palace? And,
Yes.
What's going on? So take a second to tell us what is a memory palace, and then how could we use a memory palace to learn Japanese?
Okay, this is exciting stuff, because everybody has access to real estate in their lives, and they are not tapping its potential. You're paying rent on your home, and you're probably just losing that money month after month, or you're dumping it into your your loan that you took on your home, and you're not even using your home to memorize information like hiragana. So imagine that you take your place that you live in right now, and you just imagine a journey throughout the home that you live in. Like, you start in your master bedroom, perhaps, and you walk from the corner of the bed where you stand up, and you go to where your dresser is, and then you go to the door, and then in the hallway there's maybe a bookshelf, and beside that is the bathroom door, and so forth. You go down the stairs into the kitchen. This is all something that you can either picture in your mind, or you can create or you already have a very strong spatial sense of where one thing is with relation to another. So you could be in a cafe right now listening to this podcast, but when I say think about your kitchen, you can get some kind of impression of what your kitchen is like in your mind, either visually or just conceptually or spatially. And when you can do that, you're able to take another piece of information, like perhaps a skateboard, and you could imagine what it would be like if a skateboard was on your kitchen table, right?
It's kind of weird, but I can. It's very memorable.
I know you might be thinking, "Ooh, skateboards, they're dirty," but that's even better, because when you can make it strange or weird, or you have some sort of visceral reaction to it, then it becomes even more memorable, right? And so if you were to imagine that skateboard were broken in half, right, then that's a particular shape. So it's no longer just a straight linear line, but it's a line that is broken. And that line, maybe it's just the tail of the skateboard that's broken. And it's at a more or less 90-degree angle break. And it's sort of at an angle in and of itself, hanging off the table, right?
Like the roof of a house or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. and that's sitting there. It's getting your table all dirty, and I don't know, maybe someone like Homer Simpson is on top of it, and he just jumped on it and he broke it, and he's kind of like going like that, right? You could imagine that is something that you might be able to remember, no matter where you are right now. If you're thinking of your kitchen table, and on that table is a skateboard that's been broken by Homer Simpson, and he's just going, that could be quite memorable to you, especially if you really focus in on the colors, you focus in on the shapes of this, and him jumping up and down, his big, man boobs going up and down. And it just, it's kind of funny. And also, don't forget the horror of this dirty skateboard in your kitchen on the table, and him going, I'm exaggerating this because I'm trying to get a picture in your mind. And that picture could be useful if you're learning hiragana, because that shape of a line that's broken just at the tail with the sound "h" is one of the hiragana characters.
Okay, right, yeah. So that's okay. This is so a lot of stuff has just happened there. So in case you were kind of dozing whilst Anthony is talking, what he's just done is create a very, very powerful image that can help us not only remember the shape and how you write this particular character, but also how it's pronounced. So this is huge. So let's just break this down again. And guys, if you're driving or you're kind of cooking and you're only kind of half paying attention, make sure you kind of stop and tune into this bit, because this is really critical. So you've asked me to picture my kitchen, which I obviously know very, very well, and to picture a dirty skateboard sitting on top of a surface, which is obviously a horrible thought. And you've asked me to imagine that the skateboard is kind of snapped in half almost, so it kind of creates like the shape of a roof. And which is exactly how the hiragana he sound looks. It's kind of two lines at 90-degree angles. So I can see that very, very clearly. That's the visual side of it, right? And then you asked me to imagine Homer Simpson on top of it. Presumably he's just broken the skateboard because he's been jumping on top of it, and he's actually doing that, and I'm watching him doing that right now, and I'm creating, and he's saying this sound he he he, which is kind of Homer Simpson like. And that he is the sound of the character. So I now know not only how to write that character, he, but also how to say it and to recognize it. And,
absolutely.
And so I've kind of got a character there for free. I've learned how to write and say it. Now, this is great, but what's gonna stop this just disappearing? Why is this gonna help me? Why am I gonna remember this? Why is it gonna make it more memorable?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, when you are doing this as I teach, Homer Simpson isn't, or whoever you pick, because it needs to be personal to you. If you don't have any relationship to Homer Simpson, then you might just pick somebody else doing some other thing with another object that means something to you. It could be a golf club, for example. But the way that it's going to work at the highest possible level so that you can memorize the most, the fastest, and recall it with the greatest ease, and you want to recall it in a particular way so that you're able to get it into long-term memory, is you're going to use Homer Simpson or another figure for more than one character along a journey that you've created throughout your kitchen and other parts of your house, or it could be your office or a church or a movie theater or wherever you're familiar with. And you're going to follow that person for as many of these characters as you can, engaging in activities that enable you to recall the sound and the shape of the character. And you'll construct this in advance, this memory palace journey. It takes 5 to 10 minutes for most people to get into it. Maybe your first time you're looking at a half an hour investment or something thereabouts, but it's an investment that will serve you for life, and you will never forget the time that you spent putting this together because of how fast you can learn and memorize and recall these characters and get them into long-term memory. So I call this figure a bridging figure because it bridges stations or stops in a memory palace. So that kitchen table is a station. And then when I did this, I happened to use the kitchen table in an apartment that I was living in for that particular character. And then on the very next station was the fridge, and on top of the fridge was Ho. And that was a very, very powerful image next, and I'm not going to tell you what Homer Simpson was doing in that image because it's not radio friendly, but that's the point, right? Is that the worse it is, so to speak, then the more memorable it is. And then once that I had done this for, I would work 5 to 10 characters at a time, and then I would go back in my mind, close my eyes, shut my book, go away from from the diagram that shows all the characters, and I would go and take a notebook and I would draw out what I had done. And then I'd go back and compare against the record. And then over a very short period of time, well, in fact, the very next day, I could draw them all out, and I knew what they sounded. There was a couple of mistakes here and there, but mistakes are beautiful. They're the greatest gift, because then you can correct them, right? And so you're chaining things together, and you're using that chain as the mechanism, the tool for recalling the information. And recall is what helps you get it into long-term memory. And then you want to go on to things like actually writing words, reading, speaking, and listening as much as possible while you're doing this. But you've got this done. You're going to get a sufficient amount of repetition so long as you go into those other elements of language learning. And this is, you can go on to katakana from there.
So you've just given us an example of the het and the hot, and how that could work in your kitchen. But there's 48 characters in hiragana, and so you've got to have 48 stations, as you call them, around your house with 48 images for each of the characters. Is that right?
Yes, and
sounds like a lot of work.
It isn't. I can tell you that absolutely with no conditions. It's work relative to your decision to call it work. I call it play. I call it fun. I wouldn't. There's very few things that I'd rather do, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students who just absolutely love this. And so it may not be for everybody, but it's just amazing. And I have thousands of students who don't love it, but they still do it and they get results.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of joking a little bit when I say it sounds like a lot of work, because the thing is, I know from trying to learn alphabets myself that you kind of got two choices. What normally happens with alphabets, when I've learned them the old-fashioned way, you kind of, if you like, which kind of, say for example, if you didn't know any better and you wanted to learn hiragana, you might just kind of copy out the characters over and over again until you learn them, right? But the problem with that is, the drawback of that is that you then will forget them more frequently, because there's nothing to really tie them together. So you might learn them quickly, but then the work comes in the follow-up, because you just forget them. So you have to go back and learn them over and over again. But what I found with the memory palace, the cool thing about the memory palace is that although it is perhaps a little bit more work up front, and it does sound like it's going to take time, obviously, to come up with those 48 stations and images. But the thing is, once you've done that work, that's it, isn't it? Because because it sticks so much that you kind of front loaded all the work. So all the work comes at the beginning, and then that's you done, because it's all there in your head.
One metaphor that I used to like to use a lot, I should really bring it back, is imagine if you wanted to go to Japan, right? And no airports existed, but you knew that there was such a thing as airports and airplanes, right? The airplanes are available, but there's just no airport where you live, and there's no airport in Japan, or there's no airport where you live, let's just say. All you have to do to get to Japan is build an airport, right? And then you can go to Japan as much as you want, as many times as you want. And you can go to all the other places in the world too. You just need the airport, right? And that's sort of what this is when you talk about front end work, right? It's just taking the time to figure it out. And then once you've got it, it's a skill that serves you for life, and you're done with the hiragana. You can go on to all the other aspects of Japanese, and you'll now have this tool to assist you. And so it really is like having an airport. And if people were to say to you, why don't you just put some time in and build an airport? You'd be crazy to say no, because the world is at your fingertips. So
absolutely,
that's the way
Yeah, so once you've got all the characters in stations around the memory palace, then just tell us a little bit how you would practice that, because presumably it doesn't all stick first time, right? You do have to do some practice. So what's the kind of process that you go through to practice and to recall all of the characters?
What I like to do is work in chunks of 5 to 10 characters, and it was something more complex like kanji. It would be even just 3. Maybe 2, sometimes even just 1, depending on what it is. But with these, they're relatively simple. and the sounds are also simple for each one. So work in chunks, and again, try to think of a bridging figure that you can take for as many steps along the journey, as many stops along that journey as possible. So you're maximizing the connectivity, because you reduce cognitive load when you're able to follow a track and follow a character along the track, right?
So you're kind of walking from one station to the next? Is that through in your mind? You're kind of walking around your house? Is that the way it works?
Well, some people do that. Some people do that. There's different ways. You can see a bird's eye view of what's going on and see yourself from above, walking around, or see Homer Simpson walking around. Or you can have a second eye view, like a video game, where you're seeing through, like you're standing there in the kitchen and you're looking at Homer Simpson. Or you can do like a kind of a fusion of those things. Or if you're really practiced, you can do what I do, which is really none of that. Because what has happened to me, and this is something that will, I believe, happen to people who practice this, is it's really like your Memory Palace journey is a collection of stars in a constellation, and you just zoom from one to the other. So you don't have to build the Memory Palace in your imagination. It's just kitchen table, corner of the balcony, bed, or corner of the bed, as the case may be. And you just go zoom, 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 and then you just recall what's there. And, you don't necessarily have to see these things. I don't really have that visual of an imagination. It's a combination of sort of seeing a ghostly kind of image of, say, Homer Simpson, and just thinking about Homer Simpson. There's a lot of verbal content to it as well. And then feeling like the force, the velocity of that skateboard breaking is a part of how it's memorable to me. So it sounds sometimes like it's a primarily visual art of memory, but it's not. It's many, many things coming together. But if you can picture a journey through your house as if it were a constellation, that's the fastest way to work. But in the beginning, you might like to actually create a kind of a virtual video game experience where you imagine yourself walking from the kitchen table over to the fridge, and then you experience a new image that's there that helps you recall the sound and the shape of the character. But I don't think you need to do all that, because that creates work. But if you could just think of a spot in a home, and then the next spot and the next spot, and that comes through creating the memory palace in a particular way. Because a lot of people like to build memory palaces as they go along, but I think it's really important to create it first and to draw it out and get a good sense of where it is, so you know where you're going, and even practice that memory palace without using it first, so that it's built out, and that will reduce cognitive load as well when you're using it, and you can really streamline it. And if you don't, if you have any doubts about this, Alex Mullen has memorized a deck of cards in 18 seconds, right? And he's doing exactly this. That's a deck of cards. That's not even meaningful information. Like, what does King of Clubs mean?
All right, so can one memorize hiragana in 18 seconds?
Well, it's an interesting issue. If I could just make a little sidetrack, one of the reasons they don't have foreign language as an element in memory competitions is because there will be people who have an advantage, right? But they do have abstract images as a competitive element in some of the competitions. So there are symbols that may or may not be hiragana-esque, but there are abstract images, and people can memorize them very, very fast, and they can memorize a lot of them.
So how quickly do you think someone could use these techniques to memorize the whole of hiragana, alphabet? How quickly do you think someone could use these techniques to memorize the hiragana alphabet?
Well, once you have the magic formula and you're putting the spells together in your mind using a memory palace, it really shouldn't take more than an hour and a half to 3 hours. And actually, within that, let's say, maximum 3 hours, you should have time to create the memory palace itself and test it, walk through it a few times, and then even within 3 hours, do some testing of what you've memorized. But you do want to then give yourself space and go do something else and rehearse the material. So really within 3 hours is probably the outer limits that someone would need.
Yeah, I mean that is obviously pretty good stuff. And for anybody who has is learning Japanese and just has not got round to learning to read and write, or maybe you're even, I don't know, maybe you're just thinking about, maybe you like the idea. I mean, it's pretty cool just to learn to read and write Japanese. Anyway, but for anybody out there, definitely worth taking a look at this. And so what we've done is we've prepared a blog post over on the blog Obviously, it's a blog post. We prepared a post that's going to walk you through this in a little bit more detail. And if you'd like to check out that blog post, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/memory shortcut. That's iwillteachyoualanguage.com/memory shortcut, all one word. But we wanted to make sure that you don't get lost through the process and that you can definitely follow all the things that Anthony's been talking about here. So, Anthony, what did you put together as a free download for people at the end of that post?
Well, there's a 10-point checklist to make sure that you have absolutely understood everything on the post, and it walks you through the steps that you need to take in a linear manner. And if you just follow that, then you will have this power, this ability. It's very simple. This is not data for later, as they often say. This is something where you need to get your hands dirty and really, really practice. Like, so many people,
you got to do the work, right? It's not just going to be read a blog post and suddenly know hiragana. You're going to have to apply yourself for a good 2 or 3 hours to get this result on you.
I think one of the things that happens is a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this. There are people who want to know what something is. There are people who want to know why something works the way that it does, and there are people who just want to get in and do it. And there are benefits to being each of that sort of person. But if you start overthinking this, then that's not going to be the way to learn it. To understand how the memory techniques work, you really do just have to dive in. And those who don't are forever kept outside. But those who get in, they'll see what this trick is all about. And it's not really a trick. It's a skill. It's an art. It's a craft. And it's a very, very beautiful one. And you mentioned that people listening to this, they might have no interest in Japanese, but might want to go through it anyway because it is a cool thing to be able to look at it. And that's exactly right. I mean, you see, once I learned these characters, I started to realize that I see them all the time, in the world, even in Germany. It's just incredible. And to be able to look at them and know what they are supposed to sound like and then play around with them when they're beside each other and figure out what those sounds are, it's incredible. And it's a testament to yourself of what you are capable with your memory. And then you can apply it to other things as well. So going through this checklist will serve anybody listening to this podcast and reading that post. You can apply it to any character set and other information as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so once more, to check out that post and get the Memory Palace Success Checklist that Anthony's been kind enough to put together for us, head to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/memory shortcut. Anthony, it's been great to have you. Pleasure talking to you as always. What's coming up for you in the rest of the year?
Oh, well, I'm now intensively learning Chinese, and I want to thank you since we're talking, because your training been incredible in terms of, 2 points in particular. One is, to actually get a language learning resource and go all the way through the one thing, not just like abandon it and skip to the next one and the next one, which has been incredible advice for me. And also just, just coming at it daily. And I know all this stuff, but I love listening to your podcast and just getting to know you personally, because it just, is such a inspirational thing, and to have that advice. So this is a good opportunity for me to thank you for that. And
thanks. Very good of you to say.
It's inspiration that really makes the journey exciting, in addition to what I get to do with the memory magic.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much again, and we'll see you. Well, you have to come back, and then maybe we'll talk about how to memorize 10,000 kanji or 10,000 Chinese characters next time.
Oh, but by then, let's see if I have. That'll be great.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that interview with Anthony. Memory techniques are a fascinating area, and there's no one better than Anthony to show you the light, so to speak. So he's written a great post on the blog. Definitely go and check that out. iwillteachyoualanguage.com/memory shortcut, and that will give you a little bit more detail about how you can start using these techniques to learn hiragana or to improve your memory for foreign languages overall. It's been quite a long episode, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT, and if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.